In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jaros.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Today is October 14th, a Saturday here. We are finally back in our offices here at the Defenders Media Office in downtown West Chicago. We have been on location the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, we were at the Moody Church attending a conference where we had a chance to interview Dr. Clay Jones on the problem of evil and suffering. And last week, we had a late invitation of sorts to interview Dr. Fuzz Rana of Reasons to Believe. And so we went over to Ginger Creek Community Church and talked to him there. So I'm glad to be back in the saddle here, if you will, at the office for what I hope is a regular episode, but it's not regular in the sense that we're going to be bringing you a heavy theological topic. And part of that is on purpose. I know we had been doing that more frequently, discussing deep apologetic and theological matters. Today's episode is a bit more lighthearted. We're talking about sports, but not just talking about sports like, hey, the quarterback did this, or I can't believe the Cubs won the National League Division Series against the Nationals. Not in that sense. What we're going to be talking about today with my colleague Kevin, who's back in studio for first time in a while here on the show. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
We're going to be talking about how the industry of sports has become bedfellows with the government in a number of ways. And in a sense, either legally or even just in terms of its market share, has a monopoly in the economy. And so we're going to be getting into discussing topics related to that. So if you want to participate, we are live streaming this, so I will try my best to follow along with your comments here. If you are watching, you might notice that it is just Kevin and myself. Chris is off this week. And so we've reverted back to some of our old technology. We're using the Mevo camera here, and we won't have the overlays throughout the episode today. And so if you miss that, if you're someone that misses that, then let me tell you, you should support our ministry. We're doing a fundraiser right now. We are 22% of the way to reaching our goal. And part of the money that we want to raise, we're trying to raise a total of $800 a month, okay? And some of that money is going to go toward paying a producer, a.k.a. Chris. The man, his nickname is Merlin because he works magic. And so he's got this great camera. He works the overlays, and it really is just a great benefit to our ministry. And so if you like having that high quality video production, I want to ask you to support our work, whether it's $10 a month or $20 a month. Please help us to reach our goal so that way we can continue to bring to you a great production week after week. Nevertheless, he's off this week, and so we are, again, reverting to some old technology here. But it's good technology nonetheless, because we're still coming to you live. These are first world problems, Kevin.
That's right. We're blessed by them.
That's right. Okay, there's that. Let me also say, too, I am now making this the official announcement. On November 3 and 4, I welcome you to request your presence to join us at the Compass Church in Bolingbrook, where we are having the annual Defenders Conference. And this year's theme is 500, the Protestant Reformation, where I will be joined with a number of scholars, such as Jerry Walls, my personal friend Richard Park. We also have Dr. James Payton, and a number of others. Cisco Cotto is a radio personality here in the Chicago area. He'll be joining us and a couple others. And we're going to be talking about themes and issues surrounding that momentous era. It's not so much an event in the sense that it's a singular thing. The Reformation was, a period of time. Multiple events occurred within that short era. we're going to be talking about those events, the ideas, and as I say informally, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Protestant Reformation. We'll be constructively looking at some of the shortcomings, some of the good things about it. And again, that's November 3 and 4 at the Compass Church Bolingbrook campus. I hope that you'll join us. And if you want more information and want to register, you can go to thedefendersconference.com. So that's a website I've been working on all week, Kevin.
Yeah,
so
good.
it's finally up to snuff. And so later this afternoon, I will post that out on the Defenders Media social media outlets and the website as well. So
cool.
Great. So we've got 3 weeks to promote the event. So if you are a fan of the show, please help us to spread the word about that event. We were a little bit late in securing a venue for a number of reasons, just a couple setbacks. But should be a great time, a lot of fun.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get the opportunity to live stream the at least the plenaries as well. So we'll see. We did that at the Deeper Roots Conference back in September. And so maybe we'll get that chance as well for this event.
Cool.
So I know there are a couple people that have submitted questions to the mailbag. We will be getting to those later today. But before we get to that at the end of the show, Kevin, I want to talk about, and I thank you for joining me today for discussing the monopoly of professional sports. So maybe let me ask you, I've got sort of my reasons for thinking that professional sports has, as I said, either a legal or an informal monopoly. Mm-hmm. What do you see as maybe some of the indicators that there is a monopoly here?
Well, let's see. In terms of leagues, there's really no competition for. I mean, NFL, Major League Baseball. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Let's see. Then you have, for a while, they were nonprofits because they were passed through, but NFL gave that up. I read that article that you said about why they gave it up, which is interesting.
Yeah.
That they can hide some of their financials and how much they're paying other people.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they can't also be berated for being a nonprofit.
Right. Yeah, because that looks bad from a marketing perspective. A nonprofit, that's a $2 billion a year industry.
Right. Yeah. Which is funny, but that is just one. That's like a pass-through organization. They're saying for all of the leagues. So I mean, it kind of makes sense. And they're claiming that it didn't really impact their bottom line that much, like maybe $10 million, which is a lot, but it's
drop in the bucket for them.
Exactly right. So let's see, and then you have basically it's the teams controlling other teams, and it's just an organization like that. And it's hard to break in because they have contracts with cable and they have contracts with distribution and things like that. So you need a lot of momentum behind you to get up to that level. So I guess those are the big indicators that come to my mind about it. I mean, then you have like education and how they recruit. Out of that, I've read some articles you sent me about the corruption that goes on.
That's right.
And the problem with not being able to pay players what their the money that they're worth, pretty much.
Right.
So yeah, I think those are the big ones that come to mind in terms of the control that they have. What was interesting is one of the articles you sent me talked about like a Major League Baseball. Supreme Court decision that occurred in the 1920s, I think, that basically said that they are not an interstate commerce. They don't engage in interstate commerce. What's ironic about that is at the same time you have, roughly the same time, you have like Wickard v. Filburn and stuff like that, where just growing grain on your own property for your own consumption, they consider that to be interstate commerce, but not Major League Baseball. The
sports teams travel; they cross the states.
They do, and I mean, even if you don't consider one individually, they certainly have, as an organization, they certainly do cross it. So it's you see this contradiction, and I think the contradiction bothers me more than the monopoly status itself. I think that my overview is that I think that. That most natural monopolies serve a purpose, and as long as the government doesn't get involved, and we can get into like the stadiums, and there's another big indicator.
Oh yeah,
not so much of a monopoly, but just a buying government. Basically corruption in terms of what the people who we elected locally in our cities are willing to do. They're willing to use public funds, which obviously isn't their funds. So So this is something that Milton Friedman would always.
You
make
can
a
talk
point
about the
about.
4 ways that he.
Exactly right.
Yes.
But basically the key one. Well, you can.
Well, here let me explain it here
Okay,
for those that aren't familiar with it. So Milton Friedman, who was a 20th century economist, and he taught at the University of Chicago for many years. He said that there are 4 ways you can spend your money. Okay, the most efficient way.
Or spend money in general.
Right. And spending money in general. The most efficient way to spend money is to spend it on yourself, right? Spending your money on yourself. Right. That's the most efficient way. So I might not go have a steak meal for dinner. I might opt for KFC, Taco Bell.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's
you make compromise. You make trade-offs because
it's your money.
Exactly.
You want to save what you can.
Exactly.
Now, another way you can spend money is when you spend someone else's money on yourself. So let's say your boss takes you out to lunch, and he says, he or she says it's my treat, right? So you think, okay, well, I'm going to get a milkshake.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't normally have purchased that milkshake,
right?
But because someone else was willing to pay for it, you splurge,
right? Like you hear people with expense accounts or something like that.
But now you're not going to go too crazy because you don't want the boss to think poorly of you,
right?
If you go wild. So now the third way you can spend money, which is equivalent to the second way in terms of efficiency, would be to spend your money on someone else. Like when you buy someone a gift, you're willing to pay someone or to gift someone something that is of more value than you would have paid for yourself. And so you might think here that you would be willing to buy someone the milkshake, right? Now, the fourth camp here. This is when you spend someone else's money on someone else, okay? So when you spend, essentially this is what government does.
Right.
They tax people, they take that money, and they spend it on someone other than themselves. Sometimes they spend it on themselves, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But in general, the programs that they create are spending money on someone else. Spending someone else's money on someone else. And that is the least efficient way to spend money.
Yeah.
You're just not as careful with it. You don't care as much.
Yeah, you don't care really what they get because it's their gift. So you're not going to be benefiting from it. You don't care really how much you take because it's not their money. So
Right.
Yeah.
So in this respect, as it pertains to professional sports, I think what we see in terms of stadiums are cushy plans from local governments to woo sports teams to their city. And instead of these sports teams building the stadiums themselves, which they can do, they have the money to do it.
Or they could take out corporate bonds and the people who want to support them can.
Yeah. So there are perfectly legitimate private ways for them to build stadiums. Nevertheless, of course, in their interest, they want to save as much money as they can. So if they can get a government to give them money, they're going to try and do that.
Right.
So we've got issues like in St. Louis and in Memphis, and recently Los Angeles, at least from the articles that we had read. These are all great examples of government using taxpayer dollars to woo people to their cities. Now, let me go into a couple details here. In St. Louis, it was in the 1990s, I think, that the St. Louis Rams agreed to stick around, and because the city of St. Louis is going to give them so many hundreds of millions of dollars to build a stadium. Okay? So what does the city do? Well, they I forget the precise details, but they might take out bonds to pay for it, or in Atlanta, there's a hotel tax that covers the NFL stadium there. And so governments come up with their ways to fund these cushy plans to build stadiums. It puts a burden on the taxpayer, of course. But what happens? Well, look what happened in St. Louis. St. Louis no longer has a football team. St. Louis Rams have moved to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And the city of St. Louis is still paying off that stadium.
Right. And if it was their own money, they'd include something in the contract about them being locked in or or something like that
Yeah.
for years to come. So,
Yeah, or having the Rams cover the cost of the stadium if they were to leave.
exactly, right. But because it's not their money, these little things slip by and it's not important.
Well, either it slips by, right, and they don't care, or maybe they thought about that, but they thought they didn't want to lock in the Rams. It's like, why would you sign a prenuptial agreement, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, though, that's sort of the informal monopoly, we might say, where NFL teams are twisting the arms of local governments to give them money.
I don't know that I would consider that monopoly because you don't have to have. I mean, if it wasn't the government doing it, I would say that's fine. You can do whatever you want with your own money to make that deal or not for an area. But I consider,
I would call it a monopoly insofar as that there's only one professional football league.
Right.
And insofar as St. Louis might want to have, I guess it's only a monopoly in that sense, but it's true there are other teams that might be interested to move to St. Louis. I mean, teams do move city to city.
Right.
It does happen. But nevertheless, I think it's still an issue when you only have,
it's certainly an issue
20-something or early-something teams.
Corporatism where the government's taking over responsibility for corporate interests, which is,
Yep. And then you get, I know in Miami, one of the issues was the Miami baseball field in the MLB. I forget the name of the park exactly. It's a newish park, just past couple of years. And taxpayers were on the hook for a lot of it. It's like $1 billion stadium, right? And the problem, though, is when the team doesn't do well, then there's low attendance.
Yeah, they can't make back hardly anything.
That's right. So it's just, in a sense, it becomes a flop.
Yeah.
And it's an investment that the government does,
right?
And it fails.
And this is money that they took from other people to get. So
yeah, right. So good. I'm glad you brought that up. So because ultimately this is not about wealth creation.
Yeah, even if it makes economic sense, even if it was a good investment, they're taking money from other people to do it.
That's right. Yeah. So a number of the articles we read, I remember one article from PBS, and I'll be sure to provide some of the links to the articles that we read here on the website if you're listening to this either now or after the fact and you want to check out what we're basing our discussion upon. There was an article by PBS where the reporter had noted a number of economists that said, hey, this is going to be job creation, either just in the construction itself of the stadium or also in just, if you're wooing a new team, you got to pay the ushers, the concession, you got to pay people to work at the stadium.
Yeah.
So job creation, which is good. However, when you tax people, you get their money. You're just redistributing the wealth. And so you really want people to have invested it privately from the get-go.
Right.
And so that, I think, is one of the issues, because we should not be so quick to think that if the government just takes money, throws it at a project, it's going to lead to more revenue.
Right.
That's not always the case.
That's hardly ever the case.
Yeah, hardly ever the case.
Yeah, it's thrown more money at education and performance hasn't improved. So.
Yeah. I mean, and if we look at all of the industries where government has thrown more and more money over the past few decades, those are the more expensive fields.
Yeah.
That's why it's more expensive to put a kid in school. Healthcare prices have gone up.
Military spending is astronomical.
Yeah. And when you look at the areas where the government hasn't thrown money into an industry, what happens? In general, you see a decline in the cost to the consumer.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you have a free market.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the best examples I like to use are smartphones or phones in general, cell phones.
Yeah.
Because the government did not get involved. The government didn't throw money at these companies.
Right.
They did fine just on their own, and there was competition. And the companies got better and better at making phones that consumers wanted.
Right.
And so we went from the Zach Morris, Saved by the Bell, big, huge phone, to now a smartphone.
Yeah.
And for those of you watching here on live stream, you can see I'm running the Mevo camera from my iPhone. So that's how smart phones are these days, that they can even run cameras.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Pretty wild.
Yeah.
So, but that's what happens, I think, when the government doesn't get involved. In the long run, there is a cheaper, more affordable product, and it's a better quality product.
Right. Yeah.
These are general rules,
Mhm.
I would say.
Yeah.
And when we look at professional sports, while ticket prices can be cheap, I think the government getting involved and picking winners and losers it's bad for the taxpayer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially certainly on an individual basis. I mean, you can make an argument that, well, lots of people in this city are, sports fans, and so they would go along with this. But even if you have a majority saying that, you're basically taking money from the minority.
The people that don't want it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, nothing is holding people back from saying, hey, why don't you chip into this campaign to bring this stadium here?
Exactly.
Nothing is preventing people from privately organizing and saying, we're taking a collection. Let's raise $500 million to pay for this.
And if it's a good economic investment, well, then you should be able to sell the bonds for that and get the payoff, whether that comes or not. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So one of the things, just so I don't forget, I do want to get into talking about college sports.
Okay, yeah.
And I do, maybe we'll get to that after the break. But I also want to talk about the fact that professional sports is an entertainment industry. It's almost as if people don't realize this. And I think in terms of looking at a society at large, when we put so much emphasis and money into entertainment at the expense of other social projects, I think that we should have caution there. As much as I am a diehard Cubs fan, I do not like, I do not like spending $80 a ticket.
Yeah.
Right. That is too much for me. And now we've got a situation where players, to play a game, are requesting tens of millions of dollars to do what they do. And it's just a game. It's just a game.
That's true. Yeah.
I think that's a big problem in our society when we're willing to say, hey, you can swing a bat and hit a ball out of the park. Let me pay you $60 million over 5 years. And yet, the president of the United States makes less than that.
Yeah.
So in terms of job importance, now, mind you, what I'm not calling for here is regulation.
Well,
I'm not saying,
Well, that's coming close to it, though.
What
are you saying?
No, what I'm saying is that the market can dictate.
Okay, so $80 a game might be good if they're filling the seats and people will pay that, right?
But what I'm suggesting is that consumers can request cheaper prices, and
how would they do that?
Well, they could stop showing up to the games.
There you go. Yeah, you're right.
So,
absolutely. Or go to a AAA game or something. I go to the King County Cougars.
Yeah.
It's just as fun for me because they're all pretty much at the same skill levels. Fascinating things happen. And I think the family atmosphere is a lot better. So if playing the game, if your interest is in the game, there's a lot of other outlets even for baseball or for other avenues even besides like college. That's really cheap too.
Yeah. Well, so another thing, you can still watch the game because they're often televised.
That's true too. Yeah.
So you just don't have to go to the ballpark.
Yeah.
Which it is a different experience. It's a fun experience to be able to watch professionals play the game. That is a different experience. But you mentioned, minor league teams. You could also get involved in the Little League if you like the game and you want to see little kids. Yeah. Plus, it's a lot of fun to watch little kids.
It is. It's a different experience, but it's awesome. Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
All right. Well, why don't we take a break here? And when we come back, I want to talk about college sports. And I'm actually messaging right now with Tab Bamford. And he is a big sports guru here in Chicago. And we'll get his thoughts on this. So we will try to set that up here while we take this short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Have you heard of the Google Ad Grant for nonprofits? 501c3 nonprofit organizations can receive $10,000 per month in online advertising credit from Google, empowering you to share your message with the world. At Defenders Media, we partnered with Nonprofit Megaphone, an agency focused solely on Google grant acquisition and management. They got us approved for the grant and now manage ad campaigns, bringing hundreds of new people to our websites each month. If you are eligible, Nonprofit Megaphone will acquire and manage the grant for you for a month for free to see if they can help you too. Visit nonprofitmegaphone.com to learn more.
Hello, I'm David Smith, the Executive Director of Illinois Family Institute, a state-based Christian pro-life and pro-family public policy organization. I want to invite you to join us as we seek to be salt and light to a dark and rapidly decaying culture. You can do that in a number of ways. For example, you can join our email list to get timely alerts and great cultural commentaries. You can like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, listen to our podcasts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can attend one or more of the special events and forums we host in different parts of the state. We do all these things to encourage and equip Christians in Illinois. You see, we need you to help us fulfill our mission to boldly bring a biblical perspective to public policy. Our faith requires us to be bold, speak truthfully, and love our neighbors. Join us. Visit illinoisfamily.org to learn more.
All right, well, thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsors. And we are trying to get a hold of Tab Bamford here. He's a sports guru and specialist here in Chicago. And while we do that, why don't I realized I could take the mailbag now while we hopefully get set up with him and get that going. So I'm trying to multitask here, but nevertheless, I love to play this song. I like the guy's little at the end. All right, so the first question that we have comes from David. And David has a question here. I want to make sure that I'm phrasing it correctly. Well, I can paraphrase it. Basically, David has wondered here about the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, wondering if these are appearances of Jesus, if I'm remembering his question precisely, and I can get that up just in case. But while I answer that, so I will start to answer that question as best as I can. David, to your question, I think that we should be careful in, I should say maybe they are, but I think we should be careful in placing too much weight upon what I think is ultimately speculation. I don't think there's enough evidence for us to conclude that the angel of the Lord, as he appears in the Old Testament, is the second person of the Trinity. I just don't think we can go that far in saying that. Maybe it's a nice little thought to think that maybe it is, but I don't think we can really have a reliable belief that it is. So, yes, okay, here's this question. So he writes, I recently read this somewhere and was wondering if it agrees with it. In the Old Testament, there are many references to the angel of the Lord. Would you agree that this was an earlier manifestation of the Son of God before his permanent incarnation? As after the birth of Christ, there is no longer any more references that the Lord appeared as this manifestation again. So, David, again, thank you for your question. As I just said, I think that would ultimately just be speculation. Now, I'm not an Old Testament scholar, so I'd be happy to, if you can hear back from an Old Testament scholar on that, by all means, see what they say. Okay, so we do have another question, and let me load it up here in the emails, actually. if I can find it, because it was a very complex and yet important question on the on slavery and the early American states and their different approaches to that. So let me load it up here, and it was from a listener who was listening back to one of our very earlier episodes on, I think it was religious liberty. Oh, you know what? Maybe we'll pause on that because we've got Tab Bamford here. He's calling in, and we'll get him up here on the line. Hey, Tab, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Yeah. All right. So we're broadcasting live right now. So I'm glad that looks like you had a soccer game canceled.
Yeah. Thank you, Rain.
Great. Well, so for those that don't know, Tab Bamford is a sports aficionado here in Chicago. You're a big Blackhawks fan, and you blog at I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, Chicago Daily Sports Tab. Is that right?
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So I've got I write for Chicago Now, the Fourth Period magazine, CommittedIndians.com.
Yeah, Committed
Manage
Indians.
stuff for Bleacher Report and the Big Ten Network, and
Oh yeah.
so
Cool.
Lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for joining us on the show today, and we're talking about the monopoly of professional sports. And I'm not sure what your take is on that, but I did want to pick your brain on. And it's great that we've entered the second half of the show here. We wanted to talk about college sports, and could you introduce to us some of these recent scandals in sports? I know there was one at University of Louisville, and why do you think these scandals go on? So tell us about that scandal, and why do you think these things happen?
Well, the scandal that led to Rick Pitino being placed on administrative leave, which is a polite way of saying we're legally going through due process to fire you and half of your coaching staff, is significantly bigger than Louisville. And really, there have been a few scandals. Yesterday the NCAA didn't make a ruling on North Carolina after investigating them for 7 years because players were taking fictitious classes. That's a university problem that lots of different schools have found ways for athletes to aid their GPA by taking questionable courses over the years.
Is that
that's a
right?
whole other Oh yeah.
Wow.
But that's a whole other discussion. And that comes down to academic integrity. The Louisville issue could fundamentally shake amateur athletics to its core, in that really first of all, it isn't an NCAA investigation. This was an FBI investigation.
Wow.
And the FBI was investigating a number of universities, some of whom are finding out still that they're under investigation. Louisville was the first big name player to be brought to the public awareness. And the FBI has already been in contact with, and my understanding is that they have formally charged the former director of global marketing for Adidas. And the cliff notes of it is, it boils down to Adidas has been circumventing college sports to try and get future professional athletes to wear their stuff and become brand ambassadors. And so back in the day, you'd hear about the $100 handshakes in locker rooms where boosters would come in and make sure that you got a good meal after a game and things like that.
Yeah.
This is more a case of Adidas wanting to get kids wearing their brand at a young age. And so they're accused of funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars through AAU coaches, tournaments, boosters, friends of programs.
Wow.
At the high school level.
Yeah.
and then using that influence to steer high school athletes to college programs that wear Adidas, and then ultimately trying to use that influence to continue and say, in the Louisville example, Rick Pitino turns kids into NBA players on an annual basis. If you go there, he'll turn you into an NBA player in 12 or 24 months. And when you go pro,
right,
we'll take care of you then legally.
Wow.
So literally they were poaching. They were starting to incent players at the high school level, where very few states have any kind of a care about the definition of pure amateurism.
Yeah, right.
And we're looking to start funneling money to kids in high school, and then using that influence to steer their college decisions.
Yeah.
So that could rip the lid off of amateur athletics as we know it if more than Adidas is involved, and as many universities as are potentially involved continues to grow.
So in terms of the spirit of the game, it certainly harms the spirit of the game of, amateur sports. But do you think that there should be anything legally wrong with Adidas coming to a high school kid and say, hey, we'll pay you to wear our shoe?
That is a beautifully loaded question. That's a 10-ton anvil. Lots of layers to pull back. I think legally, it's hard to say no. You shouldn't be able to get kids to wear your stuff.
Yeah.
It's dirty in the current culture and in the current legal system of athletics. I'm not sure. I mean, there's certainly legally there are money laundering issues. So there's all sorts of financial due process issues that are not, I think, germane to our conversation here. But
sure.
So they were certainly breaking laws when it comes to money laundering and things like that. Right. But your question is about the ethics behind paying high school kids to wear your stuff.
Yeah.
And I think I have always struggled with the idea that kids are anyone makes people money and don't find a way to be compensated for what their true value is. But my problem is that you can't BS the system and play around the fringes and find loopholes or create lies to effectively make that happen.
Right.
Because you can't compromise a system and blow ethics out the door for the sake of doing something. There are due process channels by which you can make things happen. There are ways to sponsor teams and make sure that kids get gear that does not call into question their amateur status.
Right.
I don't think that you need to be giving 15-year-old kids' grandmothers hundreds of thousands of dollars and steering them towards specific universities.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think that they certainly crossed the line. But going back to, I think, what the fundamental root of your question was, is it bad that elite athletes at any level could be compensated for being elite at what they're doing? And as someone who was not elite, but certainly played multiple sports in high school and ended up playing 3 years of football in college, it's a massive undertaking. And I don't think that there's any reason for athletes to not be compensated in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So that brings me to another question about, it seems that for a lot of people, collegiate athletes, I mean, they're supposed to be student athletes, right? They're a student first and an athlete second. Theoretically, yeah. But it seems that the way it's turning out is that they're athlete students, and that college sports is almost in its own sense just become a league in its own right, a semi-professional league, practically speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is the hard thing, is that when you look at the volume of kids that go play college football, anywhere from the University of Alabama to North Central College or Wheaton College or Taylor University or Little Sisters of the Poor or whatever, you have hundreds of thousands of individuals that matriculate up to the college level and play football somewhere.
Yeah.
Out of that, you end up with about 240 that'll get drafted in some way, out of which maybe 130 to 150 will stick full-time in the NFL. And that sticking at the professional level, and this is just talking football, really, the average career life expectancy in the NFL now is about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And so you're really looking at long-term viability of a career path to being a professional football player being like an infinitesimally small percentage.
Yeah. Right.
For most of these kids, it and especially when you get to the larger programs, the Division Ones, the Michigans, the Florida States, the Alabamas, the kids are living on campus basically year round, and they're cramming a lot of coursework in. I mean, this is what a lot of folks don't realize. They take coursework over the summer so that the NCAA regulations that mandate that you have specific grades and have completed a certain number of course hours are all met.
Right.
Most of the time, the overwhelming majority of the time, football players are matriculating to the college level, and this is true of basketball as well, are getting to the college level, and they are spending a fair amount of time truly being 50-50 student athletes. There are off-season times that they are almost exclusively students. But in season, because of the travel and the way that the game has grown, during the season, when the lights are on these kids, they're viewed almost exclusively as athlete student and not student athlete. But there's the other 6 to 7 months of the year that they're predominantly a student.
Right.
So, and that's when I said before that I believe that athletes should be compensated in some way. I honestly believe that for 99.8% of these athletes, having a 4-year college education, room and board, books, and cost of living
paid for
is a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah.
If you're on the swim team at the University of Michigan for 4 years and you're out of state, that's $250,000. None of your sociology major classmates, or really any major classmates, are going to walk out of school and make $60,000 a year as a 22-year-old, 30-year-old for that matter. And so, the idea that you're going to get a $50,000 to $60,000 a year education package paid for is plenty of compensation. But there are elite circumstances around some individuals that they make the university more money and have some brand prestige that I think that they could probably make a little bit more. But when in those individuals, there's more asked of those elite individuals, the Tim Tebow's, the Johnny Manziel's, the Jameis Winston's, the Marcus Mariotas of the world, the kids that are going to end up being a number 1 draft pick. More is asked of them than most of the other kids on the roster.
Right.
You don't ask the third string point guard to go meet with the alumni after a game for a booster. The last guy on the bench isn't paying for the new locker room. It's the superstars. And so that's where the rub comes in.
So here's a question for you, and this is something that I've thought. I know and maybe you can help clarify for me, since my knowledge of the sports infrastructure is going to be quite limited compared to yours. In baseball, you have a minor league system where kids either go to college or straight out of high school, they become a professional athlete. And, most of the things it's not, a good living, but it's a living to play baseball and to try to make it in the professionals. Then you have basketball, you have the developmental league, which is a relatively new thing. I remember it was started probably less than a decade ago. Now, in football, there isn't that sort of out-of-college league. So I'm wondering, at what point should we consider as a society having a college-age, semi-professional football league for these college kids that either really they don't want to be in school, they just want to play football, and people want to watch them play football, or even when they're out of college, they want to keep playing and making a living off of it in the entertainment-filled society where people will pay money to watch that. At what point should we say, let's do that?
Here's the real rock and a hard place with that, is that if you're going to have a professional football organization of any legitimacy, that has people paying attention to it, meaning you've got more than 10,000 people in the seats.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are high schools in Texas that have 40,000 people show up on Friday nights.
They're getting more attendance than the Chargers in Los Angeles.
This is true. Rightfully so in many cases. The hard thing is that if you're going to have a fully manned roster of, let's say, 50 to 70 individuals,
mm-hmm.
and you're paying them anything, the cost of doing business is astronomical. And back in the 80s, the USFL was an attempt at a direct competitor to the National Football League.
Ah, okay. Yes, I didn't know that.
And a lot of Hall of Famers played in the USFL, and they threw a lot of money at guys to come and play in an alternate professional football league. Jim Kelly played there for a bunch of years. Reggie White played there for a few years. Herschel Walker went there for a few years. It was a massive undertaking, and they were throwing big money. And it was truly, when you look back at the history of professional sports, the ABA was a competitor to the NBA. Mm-hmm. And you were competing for who could throw the most money at the best players. And it was truly a competitive environment until you realized that the one was more successfully either built, their infrastructure was better, their leadership was better, but one was beating the other, and the two ultimately decided that the merger was necessary. The same thing happened with hockey. The first big defection was Bobby Hull leaving the Chicago Blackhawks in the early 70s when he got $1 million a year to move to Winnipeg and start with the upstart Jets. All of the owners of the new league put money into a pot, and one of the owners picked his name out of a hat to be the guy who actually got Bobby Hull, but the whole league paid his salary because they wanted superstars.
Yeah.
With the USFL, you had one of the owners who ultimately, like, his leadership effectively ended the USFL was Donald Trump. And it's because he wanted to go after the NFL, and he actually won an antitrust lawsuit against the NFL, but the cost of the lawsuit effectively bankrupted the USFL.
Sure.
So there's ESPN did a 30 for 30 on it, which is tremendous. You should watch it.
Yeah, no, I'll check that out.
But there have been other leagues that have tried to compete at the highest level. But I think at this point, when you talk about a monopoly, I don't think that we're in an environment where another league couldn't happen. But I think that it's just cost prohibitive to do it. Because you're looking at stadiums that cost between $400 and $700 million to build. You're talking about roster infrastructure, from the players on the field to the personnel that put a game on to the organizational depth in any sport. It's $1 billion proposition. And if you're going to spend $1 billion, A, there aren't that many people that'll spend $1 billion. And B, if you're going to do it, you're going to go buy a team like the Florida Panthers and move them to Seattle. You're not going to start an entire league for yourself and pray to get a television deal from Fox Sports 12. So right now, it isn't necessarily that there isn't room for a second tier, but we've created a Goliath in that all of the major sports networks are overcommitted to the sports that we have right now. And the reason that ESPN is becoming unbearable to watch is because they are overcommitted to the NFL and the NBA from a rights fees perspective. And that's why that's all that they ever talk about. And you've got to go elsewhere to find baseball or hockey. And now you've got different regional networks and individual leagues having MLB network, NHL network. So the media landscape is evolving to where, a minor league system for football, in theory, it could happen, but the cost of it, and then the other reality is that you're just the medical on football, the way that the guys beat themselves up so much.
Yeah.
And really, there's an age limit on when guys can come out for the National Football League, which is 3 years post high school.
Okay.
But physically, I've probably only seen 3 or 4 guys in my lifetime that could have, from a physical maturity standpoint, come out and play in the NFL as an 18 or 19-year-old.
Sure.
And so just the reality that it takes a lot of physical maturation, You need to be competing against the best to show that you're the best and get yourself into a position where you can actually go out and play in the NFL. And then the odds are still so long. The reality is that the NCAA is there to be a minor league for football. And we just need to admit that that's what it is at this point. And also understand that for, again, 99.8% of the kids that are playing college football, they're getting an education paid for, and they're having an opportunity to do a lot of incredible things that they wouldn't possibly otherwise be able to do because of their athletic ability. They'll never go pro.
Yeah. And I guess I would almost just prefer a society in which these individuals are handed a paycheck, and then they pay their expenses, their tuition, whatever, sort of keep it more clean in that respect. Instead,
one of the systems that I wouldn't mind seeing is, and which gets into a massive systemic question for all of higher education. But if you establish a minimum wage for collegiate employees, for me, there are kids that cannot afford to go to the University of Illinois or the University of Michigan or Iowa or wherever. And they get in and they get some level of financial aid, but then they go and they get a job working in the dining hall or working in the library or working as a research assistant.
Yeah.
My brother is getting paid to be a TA and to do research right now, working on his PhD at Colorado Boulder. There are a lot. So when you watch the 30 for 30 about the Fab Five at Michigan, what Jalen Rose says is the kid down the hall is working in the library and he can afford to go have pizza. I'm playing 60 hours a week of basketball and I can't afford pizza. So for me, but life has changed there. Now there's for the Big Five conferences, they've added a cost of living stipend into the true cost of education, which is part of the financial package that these athletes get. So if you're going to an ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12 school, you're going to get a little bump in cash to pay for something like if you've got to live off campus or something like that. And usually there's a little bit of flexibility there so that if you're smart and you work out your housing right or things like that, there's a little bit of scratch left over for you to have a decent dinner once in a while. But going back to the idea of a minimum wage, if all of the students let's use the University of Illinois that I have absolutely no understanding of their athletic culture or what exactly they pay their student workers or anything. I'm just using them as a university.
Sure.
If they decide that they're going to have a minimum wage for students that are working on campus, and let's say it's $14 an hour, the kid in the library is getting $14 an hour to pay for his tuition, and the kid in the dining hall and the kid that's doing research, if everybody's getting $14 an hour, have someone in the athletic programs fill out timesheets for the student athletes. And if they spend enough time on truly committed to sporting related activities, and for me that's defined as being at practice, watching film with a trainer, at a booster event, at an alumni event, at any university function in which they are being presented on behalf of the university, travel to and from road events, and being on the field of play or on the court.
Right.
If the number of hours that those kids are putting on timesheets in a year adds up to greater than the cost of their tuition, write them a check.
Yeah.
Pay them the difference. If you're putting in enough hours at the same hourly rate that the kid in the dining hall is doing, and you're putting in, let's say it's $40,000 for you to go to school, but you're putting in enough hours that you're actually making 60, write them a check for the other 20, because guess what? Just like the research is getting funded by somebody, just like Pfizer's writing you a check for your science building, like somebody's writing you a check for your library, just like somebody's paying for food. There are people paying for your sports, and these kids are putting their hours in, and they should be compensated for it. But I think if you're filling out timesheets, you'll find that they're probably not over the course of a full year putting in enough that they're going to get a whole lot on top of it, except, again, for those elite few that end up getting roped into all sorts of booster events and stuff in the off season.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Now, we've only got a few more minutes here, but you've talked about how the NFL is kind of like a giant in the economy, and it's just so hard to even begin to compete. Doesn't that, and this is more of a political angle to that, doesn't that bring concerns about, antitrust laws, that it's just so big that one cannot compete? So isn't that sort of at the very least, an informal monopoly?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. There's really no sugarcoating it. The NFL is in every single way a monopoly. They've made Sunday their day of the week, and they do whatever they please. They've tried to make Thursday night theirs. They've dabbled with the idea of making Friday night theirs. Late in the season, when college gets done, they'll start trying to make Saturday theirs. And they've got Monday night to themselves as well. The NFL is absolutely a monopoly, and the reason that no one will ever be able to touch that monopoly, except for the players themselves, is that it is too violent of a sport for anyone to truly come in and try and knock them off.
Yeah,
you didn't have somebody be like, "Oh, hey, you know what? Don't go watch the gladiators kill each other over there. I got a guy hitting himself with a stick over here." No, it's just, it isn't going to be as entertaining. The best will always matriculate it up to the best. There's more money there. The best players go there. But at the end of the day, the NFL will continue to be the alpha until a day comes that the best athletes are doing something else. And the problem is that now, you've got some guys that are able to go play basketball instead of playing wide receiver. You've got guys but historically you've had guys that go the other way too. Bobby Simmons could have played quarterback. He played in the NBA for 6 years. I played against him in high school. He was a terrific athlete. Antoine Randall was a point guard at Indiana for Bobby Knight. He played wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I remember
that. There have been guys who have been good enough. Once, but who's got the most? I think he still has the most touchdown passes in the history of Virginia high school football. Allen Iverson. He's a baller.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, he was an incredible quarterback.
Yeah.
So lots of guys play football and basketball. It's like this ridiculous marriage of two sports that you get roped into.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that have the most sex appeal when you're growing up. But truthfully, the only thing that will end football is people not playing it anymore. And right now you've got a fascinating time for the NFL to look itself in the mirror, because people are waking up to the fact that concussions are a real issue.
Yep.
And the physical issues that people deal with. I played at Taylor University, which is NAI. Half of our school was topped out at Division III. I've got a bad shoulder, a bad knee, and a bad back. It's just what it is. And I wouldn't trade those years of playing football for anything, but I've got lingering issues from playing football, and I wasn't that good, and I wasn't getting hit by 280-pound men running up.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's physically debilitating to people that choose to do it, and that's the key. They choose to do it. No one's going to force you to play football,
right?
Hopefully, but if you choose to do it, you understand what the ramifications are. But people are choosing not to play football at the rate that they used to, and now you have political issues off the field creeping into the NFL, where the players who are in the game today don't necessarily want to cowboy up and break bread with an ownership group that has not listened to or been inclusive to the players ever. And so now what you're doing is you're taking a sport that's got the deck stacked against it because they are killing people, and you're making it something that people historically have said. Look, I'm almost 40 years old. I knew in high school that I was going to be a mess if I decided to play football in college. I knew that if I hurt myself, it would hurt for a long time. I knew what I was getting myself into. I still did it. People have known forever it is a violent sport.
Mm-hmm.
But now science is telling us how violent it is. And the NFL continued in the wake of that to do business as usual because people kept playing football because it was still the top dog. But now when you add the political element and the fact that there's distrust of the billionaires that are controlling the purses on top of the fact that you're killing people, it's turning the game off.
Yeah.
So I think the NFL is having really a midlife crisis right now in that they've got a lot of issues off of the field to deal with and deal with quickly because that's a monopoly that could ultimately fall on its sword very, very easily if they don't watch themselves. We could be 25 or 30 years from the NFL not being there anymore.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
if you'd asked me 5 years ago if that was something that I would ever hear come out of my mouth, I would laugh hysterically at you. But
yeah.
I truly feel like they're at a tipping point now.
Yeah, I think that's right because I was reading some articles about the decrease in youth playing the sport, and that there are football little leagues where they don't have as many players for as many teams anymore. And so, what a town needs.
There are high schools. There are high schools that are disbanding programs. There are colleges that are running programs.
Yeah.
For colleges that have Title IX stipulations, having 75 or 80 male athletes on a football field, whether they have scholarships or not, it's a massive undertaking because they have to balance it with female athletes and the health care and the time suck and the other thing that people don't realize is that over the last 10 years, there have only been a handful, maybe 8 or 9 programs at Division I level that have been profitable without a state subsidy.
Yeah. So
you look at programs, and it's not like the University of Tennessee, and it's not the University of Florida. It's like Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, and that's it. Like everyone is hemorrhaging money because you don't realize that that if the University of Michigan makes ballparking $5 million on football this year, it costs them 4.8 to 5.2 to put the season on. And those are round numbers. So
yeah,
even with all of the money that people see flowing through the doors at these schools for football and basketball, you forget that it costs a buttload of money to put 120,000 people in the seats every Saturday and staff an event.
Yeah.
And to fly 80 kids cross country to participate in an event and provide health care to the 120 kids on the field. The university pays for the ACL surgery when the point guard blows his knee out. It's on their insurance bill. So you don't realize the massive cost of collegiate athletics that goes into all of this stuff. So it isn't a money driver. But for a lot of schools, football just, if everything is losing money, that's the one that's losing you the most. And it's not offsetting the losses of anything else. You can come up with money to cover insurance for the swim team because those kids are in great shape.
Yeah.
And I'm probably the only person that ever got a concussion in a swim meet because I got my wisdom teeth pulled and I was doped up a little bit in the water, and that was my fault. But there are other sports that it's a lot easier to insure than football.
Right. So the injuries are less often, and yeah,
and at the high school level, it's the same thing. Football is a massively expensive sport.
Yeah,
and when you're growing up, hockey and football, the equipment's expensive. If you've got kids that are growing out of it every 6 months, shoulder pads are a couple $100.
Yeah,
shoes are $100. Helmets are a couple $100, and you're fitting a new one every 6 months. So, again, football is having
a crisis.
A lot of things to reconsider into itself right now, just because we're realizing exactly the toll that it takes on your body to hit someone in the head all day.
So we've got a question here from Kevin, who's in the studio here.
Hi, Tab. This is Kevin. I was just
Okay.
wondering, do you see like online broadcasting as becoming a disruptive technology for the broadcasting rights that makes such a big difference to a lot of these leagues?
For the biggest leagues, no. But I think that it is absolutely forcing them to flip the script on what they consider to be broadcasting. There are different tiers of rights. Being able to show something digitally online versus showing something on television is a completely different cost structure.
Mm-hmm.
So if Facebook wants to run a deal with Major League Baseball to show an Astros Marlins game on a Tuesday, that's a lot cheaper than FS1 or ESPN doing it. So there's a lot of dirty nitty gritty on the larger tier television rights. That being said, digital broadcasting of games is opening the eyes to a lot of other sports, which is part of why football has an issue. Kids can watch college lacrosse online now, and they're like, wow, that's like hockey and football had a love child, and it's really cool and fast. Let's go do that. So you get to see lacrosse, you get to see college hockey. There are conferences of college hockey where the entire conference schedule is only broadcast online. They don't have a TV deal. There are fringe leagues that are broadcasting stuff exclusively through Twitter now.
Wow.
So I think it's opening up the range of sports options, both professional, major, minor, college, semi-pro. The buffet line for sports addicts is getting to be about 13 miles long because of online broadcasting. And it's just going to continue to get longer as individual teams take ownership of their rights and are able to sell micro packaging around their individual brand versus the national.
Yeah, I like it.
It's definitely going to open the floodgates at the regional levels and at a lot of the smaller levels. But I think there's so much money behind the big brands that unless somebody like Disney says, no, I don't think ESPN's going to write another $500 million check for the NBA, that you'll see something truly move exclusively digital.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Tab, we've got to come to a close for today's show, but let me thank you for coming on and enlightening us with all sorts of things. I didn't even know that there was this USFL league that tried to compete, and so that there have been attempts, and your knowledge of the different games, I think, is very beneficial for considering how it is that we can protect individuals and their rights, and that we maybe should reconsider having the government give subsidies and all this to continuing a game that people are losing interest in. So thanks again for your thoughts today.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.
All right. Have a good one. God bless.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All right. So I thought that was really fascinating there at the end. Great question, Kevin.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's a reminder to me that even when there is a monopoly, people find a way. The market finds a way to begin to slowly hack away at the interest. And I don't just mean like the desired interest, but I mean like the financial interest in a monopoly.
Right. And it's even about substitutable goods. I mean, because football isn't the same as lacrosse, obviously.
That's right. Yep.
But if you have the choice and you could just watch it online, maybe you'll choose that. And so it serves a similar purpose. And so, there's actually competition even if there isn't within a particular league or something.
That's right. Yeah. So it just reminds me that even when there's a giant, people pick away and nitpick at the toes of the giant until eventually people realize, the government should stop supporting the giant.
Yeah.
I think that would be the big step there. It's not that the giant shouldn't exist on its own, perhaps, but that the taxpayers are being, just burdened with continuing to support the giant when maybe the taxpayer should not support the giant. Right. This is the entertainment industry, after all.
That's right.
And it's if we're concerned about healthcare and education, I'd rather have the money go to healthcare and education, even though I think government doing that sort of thing doesn't help in the long run.
Right.
But
that's way down on the list on what you should take people's money to spend.
That's right. So I hope that this today's episode has been something a little bit different for you. It's not super theological or apologetic. It is political. We're talking about economics, and maybe sort of the economic of sports isn't something that you've considered before. So I hope that it's been beneficial for you. And so I also want to thank Kevin for coming in and
for having me.
Talking. We talked there more in the first half, but then we were able to get Tab on.
It worked out well.
Yeah. I know his knowledge would definitely help us to understand some of the issues. And more so than I even realized. So great. Well, that does it for the show today. I'm grateful for the continued support of our patrons. Those are folks that just give a couple bucks a month. Please consider becoming a patron and help us to reach our fundraising goal. I'm also grateful for the partnerships that we have with our sponsors, Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, Evolution 2.0, Fox Restoration, and nonprofit Megaphone. I want to thank Kevin again for coming along, and then also our second half guest, Tab Bamford. And finally, I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.